Welcome to the Orca. As the Eat the Rich mantra grows in the United States, the likes of presidential candidates Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have proposed an estate tax of an astronomical 77% for the very wealthy. Here in Canada, similar policies have been suggested by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, but would such a radical tax policy actually help? Geoff Costeloe is a lawyer and an entrepreneur here in Vancouver, and he's been digging into the idea, and he joined us here in the Orca studios. Hello there, welcome.
Hi Rick, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. I thought we did have estate taxes. I unfortunately have been the executor of a number of estates, and I'm all too familiar with probate fees.
Yes.
Which really is estate tax.
Yes. So I think there's always a disconnect around this because they're phrased as probate fees in law, but really they're a progressive tax wherein the larger your estate is worth, the more you pay. It's a sliding scale. I think it's 1.6% on every dollar above $50,000. But I think I wrote an article on this recently that has the exact numbers in it. Other provinces, I know I've come from Alberta where I've also practiced, and there's a flat tax, so it's about $580. Doesn't matter whether your estate's worth $100,000 or $100 million, it's the same tax, it's the same fee.
Really?
It is, yes. And so it's a lot of lawyers, a lot of people in BC, so there's no estate tax, but really this probate fee on a sliding scale is an estate tax.
Because a sliding scale in this province, because a lot of people don't know how much they're worth, we'll get into that in a minute, it can be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000.
Yes.
And it's paid, the government gets its take first before you get any of the residual from the estate. Now, when I said it depends on what you're worth, and with everything considered in an estate, real estate, RSPs, and what, it doesn't take much to raise an estate to in the many millions of dollars, $4 or $5 million, for what you would consider a middle class family.
That's exactly right. And a lot of people, they come in to get their will done, and they are middle class Canadians. They've been working, for 30, 40 years, putting money away as they can, and they don't feel necessarily wealthy because they don't have a lot of cash on hand. But when they start adding up, they bought a house that's now worth $1.5 million. They've got a pension or RSPs that have been building throughout their life. Maybe an insurance policy. There's a whole bunch of things. But you start adding that up, and suddenly you see people saying, well, it looks like I'm actually worth, $4 or $5 million here, even though it's not cash on hand available for them. Unfortunately, the governments tend not to care about whether it's cash on hand or it's sitting in your property. They want to get their hands on it and tax it.
And they want to now raise those taxes, or they're considering raising those taxes.
That's been talk, and I know the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has put out a policy for that, looking at 45% tax. I believe it's 45% tax on estates worth more than $5 million.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and I'll tell you what. I'm a lawyer. It's a lot of money that then justifies spending fees for lawyers and professionals to avoid paying those taxes.
Because nobody likes to pay taxes, and certainly nobody likes to pay more taxes.
Exactly.
So it'll be, I would think, a land office business for people like yourself and accountants to, defer it, shelter it, hide it, divest yourself of your wealth in ways that you can give it to family members while you're still alive. So is the government not shooting itself in the foot?
Well, there's yes and no. So obviously, there's an incentive there to collect more money to balance whatever the budget needs to be at the time. But there's a real issue with whether or not the additional burden of adding the taxes onto these estates actually becomes collectible. Because if you tell me, first of all, money in an estate has already been taxed through capital gains, income taxes, however that the individual has earned it. If you tell me after I've made money and I'm 65 years old that I'm worth $5 million and now the government is going to take 45 cents of every dollar I die with, that's going to incentivize me to give that money away as fast as I can, buy insurance policies, talk to accountants, talk to lawyers, and spend as much money as I can as long as it's less than whatever the government's going to take. Because I'd much rather it end up either in a charity that I like, in my kids' hands, in my friends' hands, in a business that I can pass down to my kids, than in the government's pockets.
So why would the government even consider doing that?
Well, it's certainly an easy sales pitch to turn around, and I know that's what they're doing with presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has talked about it. It's a great thing to say that I'm going to tax 77% of these super wealthy one percenters to bring more money in and kind of work out wealth inequality. The reality is wealth inequality is an issue, but this is a nice way to wave a progressive flag and say I'm going to attack the rich and get the money back. In practice, it's not. It's going to slide into the hands of lawyers, accountants, insurance agents, who are going to then be able to pad their pockets with the money that would have gone to the government.
And you're looking into this, and you mentioned wealth inequality. What then, in your opinion, would be a better way to try and equalize or lessen the wealth inequality?
Well, I mean, wealth inequality is an issue, and I understand, it's certainly the optics aren't great when we're talking about wealth inequality, and we see, and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives did a list in their report of the wealthiest 77 or less than 100 Canadian families. It doesn't feel good to say that, these billionaires are passing on their wealthy estates to their children, and it will never see the light of day either in the taxman's pocket or to other regular Canadians. But we have to remember that that is a small number of people, and what we really need to be doing is finding ways to not overtax the middle class earning Canadians who are creating jobs and paying the brunt of the tax burden. So, for example, and I don't know, because these policies haven't actually been formally proposed yet, this may be something being considered, but if you put an exemption in for the house, so that if you die and in your estate there is a piece of residential property that you live in, that it doesn't get counted towards.
And it was your primary residence.
And it was your primary residence, that it's not counted towards the estate calculation. If there's a handful of other kind of similar deductions or exemptions, you could give a vehicle, a person, and there are some of those deductions already considered when it comes to children with disabilities in terms of some of the benefits that they get, is that you're not allowed to count, for example, a vehicle that has an adaptive features to it in terms of the assets that a disabled adult may have.
What about RRSPs? I mean, I understand that they can transfer to a spouse, but they can't go to kids without being taxed.
Yes. So I'm not an accountant, so I don't come to me for tax advice.
You're close enough.
Don't come to me for tax advice. But yeah, so RRSP rollovers to spouses are an easy one that's tax free. But once the spouse passes away, in most situations, I believe that forms part of the estate. And then it's left to be fought over by the children, be divided amongst the beneficiaries, or if certain individuals have their way, to be taxed and put into the government's pocket. That's money that people have been putting away for their life savings, and as I think if you ask the average person, they're going to want to spend it and make sure that they can better off their kids, which is probably the reason they've been saving for it anyway,
Exactly.
Rather than having it go into the black hole of large government.
Fascinating topic, Geoff. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thanks so much for having me. A pleasure.